Listen, Kyrie, it's time to be an Irving, or at least to listen to an Irving. The name Irving, although famously associated with one of the greatest scientists that the United States produced, Washington Irving, the name Irving is usually associated with a Jewish person, probably by the name of Yitzchak or Israel, and most of the time associated with either an accountant or an attorney. But the name Irving suggests a thoughtful person. Kyrie Irving is one of the greatest talents in the National Basketball Association. He's an independent person, and he fancies himself as an independent thinker. And unfortunately, he's fallen prey to a trope which has spread throughout the African American community. When civil rights was championed, black community needed allies. It was natural for the Jewish community to lend its support to the aspirations of the black community. Unfortunately, those efforts by the Jewish community in supporting their black brothers has not been reciprocated, at least not by the powers that catch the headlines. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Farrakhan, all of these people are anti-Semites and bigoted. The fact that a Jewish girl was one of the 4 people killed in Selma, the fact that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched together with Martin Luther King in Alabama, those things don't make any difference in this world, in this fantasy world that unfortunately Kyrie exists in. There is a movie filled with hate and with distortion. It supposedly chronicles the Jewish slave owners, the Jewish slave boats. How many slave boats were actually Jewish? A very, very few. It's historically, they were a small percentage of the entire process. But let's talk about how slavery actually took place. One black tribe attacked another black tribe. Instead of killing them, they sold them as slaves. Who were the buyers? The buyers were Muslims. They were Arab traders. They either brought them to areas of their control or they sold them to Europeans. Europeans didn't like going into the African continent because they were afraid of the diseases. They were afraid that they might not survive. And indeed, most Europeans who settled or who were in Africa had a very, very short lifespan in Africa itself in those days. The Europeans stayed away. They stayed at the port cities and were involved in the trade. These were white, Christian Europeans. The middle people, the middlemen were Muslim Arabs, and the ones who sold them were their black brothers. That doesn't make slavery good, and it doesn't make slavery something we should be proud of. It was the reality of that time. Slavery existed in almost every country of the world. It didn't make a difference, white or black, brown. Every major country, every major empire had slaves. The Egyptians had white slaves, brown slaves. The Egyptians were a black race for the most part. Every major empire, their economy, part of their political power came from dominating slaves. The treatment of slaves throughout history is checkered with hateful things, horrific things, and sometimes sensitivity, sometimes caring about the slaves. One who reads the Torah sees that the Torah was far advanced. The Jewish people were far advanced and far more cultured in terms of the relationship they had with their slaves, Jew or non-Jew, than any other culture in the world at the time. Of course, you could say, well, why didn't they give equality to the slaves? Why didn't they free the slaves? That was the culture, that was the world. It's a world of where the economy was basically a subsistence economy. You couldn't afford to have another mouth to feed. People competed with each other over a piece of bread or a bowl of rice. So one of the ways in which competing elements could survive was if they became your slaves. Then you would feed them. Otherwise, you had to get rid of them. This is the reality of the ancient world. The ancient world was brutal. But Jews, during the period of slavery, were not just a small minority of the trade. The Jews were primarily persecuted all over Europe, all over Africa, and the Near East. Muslims persecuted Jews, Christians persecuted Jews. Sometimes the Muslims more than the Christians, sometimes the Christians more than the Muslims. Jews were locked in ghettos. Jews were persecuted. Jews were considered the property of the city in which they lived. The taxes in many places in Germany, 80% of the taxes came from 20% of the people, all Jews. That Jews were able to survive 1,500, 1,800 years, 1,900 years under such horrific conditions is a miracle. It shows the power of God. But while we were persecuted, while we were subjected to every kind of personal torture, every type of persecution that a human being could even think about, we had no time to worry about or to think about of subjecting another people. That was not on the Jewish agenda. The only thing a Jew thought about, the vast majority of Jews, was to have a piece of bread and to be able to share that bread with their wives and children. Which brings us to the modern day. Emancipation allowed incredible release of energy. Once Jews were emancipated, they were able to go to the universities, able to join the trades and the professions. Jews climbed the ladder of society. Same way that the Asians who came to this country and come to this country climb the ladder of society. They're given opportunities that they didn't have where they lived before, and they're taking that opportunity. Unfortunately, Asians are being persecuted in the higher institutions of learning. It's like Jews were during the 20s and the 30s. Same idea behind it. Limiting the number of Asians who could come to a university, all in the name of diversity. The fact is, Kyrie, Jews were among those who helped bring about the movement for the liberation of the black community. Jews were at the forefront of your fight. We supported you. We still support you. Doesn't mean we all agree, doesn't mean we have the same goals. But as members of the United States of America, as members of the population, we all have a vested interest in seeing everybody have more opportunity. We're interested in everybody having more opportunity. But there comes a time when we have to make it on our own. So far in my 70 years in this country, 70 plus years in this country, there hasn't been a Jewish MVP in the National Basketball Association. There are some great winners of Nobel Prizes that are Jewish. Some very wealthy people, some very successful actors and actresses, some great comedians, some great and holy people, and some creepy criminals. There are a lot of good people, some bad people. And the same thing is true with all races and ethnic groups. There's some great people, mostly great people, mostly good people, and some creeps. And we have to focus on the good people, strengthen the good people, and somehow or other stop the creeps from taking over. Kyrie, I love the way you play basketball. I hate the way you do politics. I hate the way you make decisions. I have to agree with you that you have the right not to be vaccinated. I myself did a video that hydroxychloroquine is not a threat to people who have atrial fibrillation, because I have atrial fibrillation. My doctor told me it's not a problem. Take hydroxychloroquine. There's misinformation about that. Misinformation about the efficacy of the shot, the vaccines. A lot of misinformation. You have every right not to want to be inoculated. That's your right. It's also your right to believe what you see. But you should have read a little bit of the background. Had you done so, you would see that this particular movie is filled with false information and should not be promoted. There were some bad actors, just as there were bad actors among the Jews in the 40s and the 30s. There's some creepy criminals. We're not proud of them. We're proud of our great citizens. And the black community should be proud of you as well, but not for your politics at the present time. Become an Irving and less of a Kyrie. That's my advice to you.